up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York calling from the altar again, and this time we are here with Garrett of DieHumane. It is great to be able to talk with you. Thanks for coming on the show, man.
Good to meet you, buddy. How you doing?
Doing all right, man. How are you doing today?
Can't complain. Live and I'm breathing.
Yeah, it's so great to have you here. This new album, The Grotesque, is absolutely kick-ass. I've always said it's another fantastic album to show the legacy of Texas heavy metal. I think it's just as good as everything from a Pantera to a Power Trip to a Drowning Pool, you name it. So thank you for this awesome album.
Oh man, thank you so much. That's a huge compliment.
Anytime, man, anytime. Was there sort of like a preconceived vision of how this project sort of came to be in a way, or was this like a very like experimental and sort of like improvisational songwriting process?
Well, for us, I mean, we've mentioned this a couple times in our like bios and stuff, but it started out as a COVID project. So Josh Vargas, our bass player, is our primary songwriter. He and our keyboard player, Greg Hilligeist, sorry, I'm always butchering his last name. He's my bandmate, and I'm always butchering his last name. Hilligeist. They've kind of written music together for several years. They've known each other since '07, been good friends since '07, so they've kind of off and on made music together, but never, did anything seriously, like no bands or anything like that. But when COVID hit, Josh works in the film industry and they both run a ghost tour business. So business was kind of at a standstill for both of them. And so in that time, they were roommates at the time. They decided, let's go ahead and start writing music again. And in that process, they, started coming up with what would be the early stages of what the Grotesque was. Mm-hmm. And at the time, I had just left my previous band and was kind of, building a home studio and starting to write music for myself. Excuse me. And Josh reaches out to me. He says, "Hey, you're one of the best vocalists I know. Can I get you on a couple of these songs?" And at first, that's all kind of started out as just like a, just for fun type of thing. And then it caught the ear of our buddy Steve Esquivel from Skin Lab. And he had a very short moment where he was part of this group as far as recruiting people. He's the one that brought Rick into the fold. He's the one who brought Sal into the fold and introduced us to Ulrich Wild. So Steve was kind of our liaison between us average Joes and all these legends that wound up finding their way to us. And from there, it kind of snowballed into what it is now.
It seems like it was almost kind of like circumstances despite the world, being totally fucked.
Absolutely.
It seemed like circumstance was kind of on your side with the formation of DieHumane.
Yeah, man. I mean, it kind of just worked out perfectly. There's really no explanation for it. It just kind of a fate situation.
Yeah. I mean, because then, you brought in Sal Abrascato, who in himself, with his history in Typo Negative and Life of Agony
Mm-hmm.
and The Pale Horse Named Death, 3 fantastic bands. Like, was all the musicians in a way, like, sought out individually to fit what this project came to be? Or was it almost kind of like, like a very organic, you have 2 roommates and they're like, oh, we know these people, let's make it sort of like a friend coming together thing.
Right. Well, with Sal, it's kind of how it was because Steve had Sal on Facebook. They weren't personally, they didn't know each other that well. But Steve is the kind of guy who will reach out to people, and whether he knows them or not. And, the music at its roots kind of had that Typo feel. And Steve was like, well, if you were looking for a pocket drummer, we should hit up Sal Abrascato. And that's what we wound up doing. And Sal wound up really digging the music, so that's why he joined. Yeah. Because originally we had some programmed drums on there, and Sal just took the drums to like a whole nother level. He saw potential in the project and wound up recording what is some of the biggest drums I've heard on an album.
I call that guy the New York Dave Grohl, because he could play drums like a machine and then
absolutely.
And then write like some of the greatest like depressing music you'll ever hear in your life.
For sure.
Yeah.
And then Rick and Steve had been friends since the early days of Exodus. Steve was in a major thrash band called Defiance from the Bay Area. So he kind of came up with Rick. And so he hit up Rick because Rick is not as known for his blues guitar style. You can kind of hear it in some of those old Exodus songs like trying to think, Cajun Hell's got a little bit of it. But overall, I mean, anything that has Rick's flair on it has somewhat of a bluesy feel, even if it's a speedy thrash solo. You can always tell the difference between Gary and him. So that's why Rick wound up, joining this group, is because he saw all that space, and it kind of gave him. He called it like Pink Floyd, David Gilmour vibes. He wanted to have that David Gilmour spacey guitar style, and I think he really accomplished that really well.
Well, it was accomplished in a way. See, my review of it is if Pantera was in a film noir in a way. Like, I felt like...
And I agree with that, too.
Yeah, like...
100%.
Because with, like, those interlude tracks, like The Descent and Sparrows, but then, like, I think it was in The Devil Sings, that particular song, where you hear, like, the blues saxophone in there in a way. It brings, like, a real cinematic quality behind it. And I know you've been involved in film as well as other members of the band as well, so it almost seemed like you were able to take, like, this groove metal style, which is supposed to be to the point, and this isn't like a ditch on groove metal, I mean it as a compliment, but like a lot of that groove metal stuff is meant to be to the point, not too thought-provoking. It's meant to just be in your face, no explanation needed. This brought like sort of like a thought-provoking element behind it in a way. I mean, was the Grotesque in a way meant to be kind of like a concept album in that regard, where there is sort of like a storyline involved? Because in addition, sorry if I'm rambling on here, but like,
no, you're good.
In addition, like, it's a very experimental album. King of Nothing is a freaking killing machine of a song. It's just heavy as shit. But then, you have songs like Epitaph or Oblivion that kind of have more of a melodic twist to it. So this was a very experimental album. Was there a sort of storyline that was meant to be followed through all 17 of these songs?
That's it's funny you asked that. You're like, we've had multiple like friends and family that had, heard it early on. That's what they thought as well. And it's not. No, it's got a common theme, yes, because not only did that pandemic cause a lot of depression and anxiety and uncertainty, which is definitely captured in this. A good friend of mine and Josh's actually wound up taking his own life in that time. So a lot of the suicidal themes. There's multiple songs with those themes. Oblivion has it. Skeletons has it. It's got like this idea of what is somebody that's going through those feelings. What kind of song would they be singing internally? So Oblivion is through the point of view of somebody who's going through those suicidal thoughts. Skeletons through the point of view of him, our friend, as he's about to jump from this building. And then you had Epitaph, who is through the point of view of somebody who just took their own life, and they're noticing the after effects that it's had. And it's, that regret that they have after doing that. So it's in no way a concept, but it definitely has a theme.
Yeah. I've always said that, like, it's almost like, when you say, like, you're not religious but you're spiritual, it's almost kind of the same way with albums, where it may not be a concept album, but it's conceptual in that regard.
For sure.
Yep.
For sure, yeah.
When you have to confront these relatively, like, traumatic experiences and, overcome your demons in a way, obviously it's very cathartic and, it pays tribute to your friend and stuff like that. But, I mean, I've always said that when, negativity is almost kind of like the fuel of your fire, artists can sometimes become victims of their own product in a way. Was the songwriting process for this just as deteriorating as it was cathartic? And did that almost make the camaraderie almost a little more chilling in a way?
No, not really. I mean, whenever you get all of us together, we're the biggest goofballs. So there's nothing but laughing and smiles when we're together. So I mean, if anything, it's our outlet to get any of those feelings that we do have out. So all of that is left on the table. All of that is left on the record, and everything else is just, it's kind of our therapy in that way. It gets all of that out so that we don't have that in our personal lives. We're all very positive people for the most part.
Yeah, definitely. I will say, like, I mean, and again, I'm always mentioning Sal. the guy who wrote, again, A Pale Horse Named Death. I mean, sometimes we make like a lot of the black metal bands look like glam metal in a way, and Sal is like one of the most positive, nicest, easygoing guys you'll ever meet.
Yeah, he's a real nice guy.
Yeah, I've always noticed the more depressing the music is, the nicer the people are. So
he's another one of those guys that'll just joke with you all day, and you can mess around with him, and he's gonna mess around right back. He gives as good as he takes.
Yeah. Well, he that's the Brooklyn in him too. So
yeah, for sure.
Yep. As the vocalist, have you always needed to hear the music before you came up with the lyrics, or was there ever a time through the making of this album where maybe like a lyrical idea or a lyrical subject matter maybe helped guide with how the record or the song would sound?
I will say on a couple of these songs, I had an idea of what I wanted to write before I actually heard the instrumental, but I didn't have the lyrics written out. I would get the idea of the concept of something from like a quote that I heard, and then I'd kind of take that theme and run with it whenever I got the instrumentals. But for the most part, when I write lyrics, I write it as I'm recording the vocals. I write it in real time. I listen to the song, I record it in pieces, and then I do a quick listen through to make sure there's nothing that flows wrong. Because I do everything right here from where you're looking. Like I've got I recorded everything on this microphone right here. So it's very much I listen to it, I get a feel for it, then I record it in pieces and I write lyrics as I go.
Mm-hmm. And being that you've also, you've worked as an actor as well, and you've kind of had like multiple talents, do you express yourself in a similar way that you would express yourself on a film or like on a stage in a way for a script? Is lyrical writing or lyrical approach almost similar in a way to addressing a script or something like that?
I would actually say yes in a lot of ways, because I always like to write through the point of view of somebody else. So a lot of these people were like, Garrett, are you okay? When they heard, for example, Oblivion, they were like, are you all right? You going through some stuff? I'm like, actually, no, I'm writing through the point of view of somebody else. So most of the time when I write lyrics, unless it's something that I kind of dictate that this is going to be a for me song, I like to put myself in other people's shoes. And it's the same way with acting. When you go in and you play a character, you're not yourself anymore. You're putting yourself in someone else's shoes. So that's kind of how I approach lyric writing as well. I mean, I love storytelling. So if I'm, even if it's just one song, I'm writing a story within that one song, which I guess kind of touches back on that idea of it sounding like a concept album, is that you have, it's almost like an anthology of concepts.
Yeah. Well, being that you always but you're always telling stories from other people's point of view. One of my favorite quotes is, every painting is a self-portrait in a way. So is there at all any vestige of your personal life, or maybe your own personal sort of like point of view also addressed on this album, or has your exploration of the arts always been a means of escapism?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't go so far as to say there's none of me, because I think that would be doing a disservice to myself by leaving myself out of it. Anything that I write is going to have a little bit of me in it. But depending on the song, depending on the subject matter, it's more than likely going to be me through the point of view of somebody else. Never saying never, but it does have a little bit of me in it for sure, because it's coming from my mind. But overall, I like, for the most part, to write through the point of view of others.
Being that that DieHumane I consider to be a super group, because having the elements of Exodus and all the projects I mentioned with Sal, were you all trying to maybe explore uncharted territory with the making of this project, or were you all trying to bring in your individual experiences and almost kind of make like a hybrid of one project?
I think we were all kind of testing ourselves a little bit. My previous band was a prog band, so I've never really given myself limits as far as what I can do vocally or should do vocally. So I kind of came from it with a prog background and having that diversity. But we're all music fans of all different genres. So, I mean, this was initially, just creative outlet that, wasn't supposed to have any rules. So we just maintained that idea. Let's say, screw it, we're going to write whatever we want. We're going to blend whatever elements we want. And if people are cool with that, cool. If they're not, whatever. It's what we want to do.
Yeah.
So I think everybody coming in with that attitude allowed us a lot more freedom. Like I can tell you, Rick's point of view on it was he was really excited about the music, but he was worried for a little bit about what the Exodus fans might think, because Exodus fans, a lot of them are very hardcore thrash and nothing else. But a good chunk of our supporters have come from that Exodus camp, which has been really, really a pleasant surprise.
Yeah.
So I think people are really gravitating towards it, and then the charts are showing that. I'm really excited to see the opening numbers for the opening week. It's been really good. So I'm thinking that in this era of short attention spans, people are gravitating towards something different. They're tired of hearing the same thing pushed by the same outlets, and they want to hear something completely different, something that's takes a risk. And I think a lot of bands are starting to do that as well. I mean, you look at bands like Bring Me the Horizon, you look at bands like Avenged Sevenfold. A lot of these bands are taking risks that they didn't technically always do.
Yeah. And
in those risks sometimes pay off.
Yeah,
most 100%. Of the time they pay off.
Even if it doesn't really pay off in terms of the reaction, it's still, like, for instance, and I don't care what people say on the internet, hate me all you want, I think the album was pretty damn good. But when Suicide Silence put out their record in 2017, that got a lot of backlash for the sort of like experimental aspects behind it. But you know what? I just saw Suicide Silence headline Chaos and Carnage to a venue full of 3,500 cap or something like that.
There you go.
And people still talk about that album to this day, have not forgotten about it, and they're still absolutely killing it. So in the end, I think when you really shock fans, it is one way to really leave your mark.
Yeah, and those Suicide Silence records with a lot of the clean vocals and stuff, they have their mark and they have their place in that catalog. And there's going to be people that are upset with that, and those people can go back and listen to the old records. People want to hear Exodus, they can go listen to Exodus. People want to hear Typo Negative, they can go listen to Typo Negative. We're doing what we want to do, and if people love it, awesome. If they don't, we don't care.
Yeah, I've always said too, like there's a couple examples of members who left Exodus and went on to do projects that were different and just as good. I think Rob Dukes is killing it with Generation Kill and whatnot. And
I love Generation Kill.
Oh, dude, that album, like, I listened to that and I just found that absurd that another human was singing that.
Yeah, it's awesome. As a matter of fact, the first time I ever heard Rob was in Generation Kill. I didn't really get into Exodus until later in my life, but I heard Rob through Generation Kill, and I was like, I got to go back and check out his stuff with Exodus. Because I heard some old Exodus, but I'd never heard his era of Exodus. This is one of my favorite. I mean, I love Zetro too. Zetro's amazing. Oh, yeah. But it's like two completely different bands with the two different vocalists.
Exodus has always, I thought, been kind of like, in a way, and I mean it as a compliment, like a lot of people associate them with Bay Area thrash, and of course Kirk Hammett was in the band and all that. Mm-hmm. But they were, I felt like, almost kind of like their own animal in a way. Like
100%.
I feel like for the thrash bands that didn't make it to the Big Four, I feel like Exodus and Overkill and Testament and Death Angel were almost kind of like their own scene in a way. Megadeth and Metallica and Slayer, play fucking stadiums and arenas. But what I thought was great about like Exodus is that they all had like their own eras and their own sort of like thing behind it. They came from the same scene but have their own vibe behind it. And I also think Shovelheaded Killing Machine is one of the most underrated thrash albums of all time.
It's a great album. That one and Tempo of the Damned are my two favorites. And people give me a lot of crap for liking the later Exodus albums, but I'm just like, I like a good production. I'm a nerd when it comes to sounds. So like, I think the songwriting on those old records is fantastic, but I do like a crisp, and that guitar tone on Tempo of the Damned is the best guitar tone I've ever heard in my life. Yeah. Still to this day. Yeah. My favorite guitar tone.
Yeah. You got it's always fun to, like irk a couple like thrash Puritans. I remember
for sure.
I almost got killed one night for jokingly, I don't really believe this, but we were talking Metallica and I said everything before the Black Album sucked.
It's a good way to ruffle feathers, and I'm here for it.
Yeah, right, exactly. I have 2 more questions for you. But
Yes, sir.
when it comes to like getting that sort of like inspiration, that creative drive in a way, do you almost have to look for inspiration? Is inspiration really something that can be sought out in a way, or do you just kind of let the inspiration strike you?
For me, I mainly look at the mood of the song. So I will check out the mood of the song, and if I have a hard time, because that does happen, if I have a hard time trying to figure out what's going on with that song, I'll pray about it. I'll listen to other genres of music. I'll listen to genres of music that I haven't listened to in years, and I'll try to get a feel for something. Sometimes it hits me like that. Sometimes it takes me a little while to sit with it and let it marinate. But overall, I think most of the feeling that I can get off of a song comes through the first listen, especially because I listen to it with fresh ears. Just like, I get a full instrumental track for the most part whenever I listen to it. I mean, might have programmed drums on it. The drums might not be final, but for the most part, I get a full track, and I'll be able to listen to it and get a real good feel for the vibe of that song. And if I want to change something, I have creative control to do that. I can say, hey, I think that I would have a lot easier of a time if you moved this part over here.
Mm-hmm.
And Josh is willing to make that change, send it back, and then all of a sudden it's perfect, and I can work with that pattern.
And you led me perfectly into the final question. Because I feel like out of all the bands I asked, this is the most appropriate time to ask with you guys, because you have a song like Sparrows that's just under 2 minutes. You have a song like Stardust Blues that's teetering on the 9-minute mark. You have songs ranging all types of song lengths here. How does DieHumane know when you are finished with a song?
We know we're finished with a song when we can listen to it and basically all be as stoked as each other. Like when everybody's excited about what it sounds like, we typically have most of the stuff done before drums or before vocals. So when one of those last two things is done, it's ready to go off the final mixing. And sometimes in that final mix, like for example, Ulrich sent us a couple of things. Like he's like, I tweaked something here. Let me know what you think. And it'll be like, oh, that's a whole nother dynamic that we didn't know it needed. And so once we listen to that final mix, I think we listen to most songs around 5 or 6 times before we okayed it for the final product.
That's a good.
So it's a pretty thorough listening process and making sure everything is thoroughly fleshed out.
Yeah, it's good. You don't overthink it too much, but you know just the amount of time to approach it.
Right.
Yeah. So before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time, for such an awesome conversation.
Absolutely.
Is there just anything else with DieHumane you'd like to promote in terms of, can we maybe be expecting a tour off of this album anytime soon, and maybe more new music in the future? Because this is just a fantastic album, and I really hope we get to hear more.
Right on. Yes and yes. The tour hasn't been booked or any of that, but we definitely plan on playing shows. We're going to take that kind of slowly because the market right now for touring is financially a lot harder than it used to be. It's just a matter of finding the right opportunities and the right shows because we want to be able to give the fans exactly what they want. I think the first thing that we're going to wind up doing is likely going to be some sort of live stream. I can't say for sure, but we're mulling things over. So we're looking at things, and as far as new music goes, we're constantly writing. So there's songs that didn't make it onto this record. We have plenty of music in the can that we're just, loading up and firing out whenever we feel like it.
Hell yeah.
So we'll have plenty of material out there for people to take in.
Hell yeah. Well, we can't wait to hear more. Thank you so much, Garrett.
Yeah,
Everybody,
absolutely, man. Thank you. Have a good night.
Anytime, man. Everybody, we are here with Garrett of DieHumane. Be sure to check out The Grotesque. This is Alex from Heavy New York, and we will see you next time.